Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, so great job in class today, right? Really loved the little activity we did where we kind of compare the Odyssey and the Iliad. We talked about the only real legitimate historical facts that we know from the Greek Dark Ages, right? Because of two guys that may or may not have existed, named Hesiod and Homer, right? We talked about, the fall of the Mycenaeans, the Bronze Age collapse, which we're really not sure how that happened or why that happened or any things really. And a lot of that is just due to the fact that the Greeks, the ancient Greeks particularly, existed several thousand years before even the birth of Christ. So we don't have a ton of direct linked artifacts, not to mention the fact too that the Greek Dark Ages is going to kind of dispose of any written records due to the fact that most of the people didn't know how to read or write, and they're apparently trusting the oral traditions of a blind guy. All right, but going forward, so we have now officially covered Neolithic Greece, early Bronze Greece, Minoan Greece, Mycenaean Greece, Dark Ages Greece. We only have 3 more Greeces to go. And we're now starting the Archaic period, right? So with this entire context in mind, that tells me a little bit okay, so we're right now sitting at about our 4th class period together, right? Usually you can expect about 8 class periods between tests, all right? So your first test will probably be either by the end of next week or the beginning of the following one. So you're looking right now at about 3 more class periods to go until we really get into it, all right? But let's go ahead and get after this so we don't have to waste too much time, right? But let's start with it, right? We're talking about Archaic Greece, right? Now, really quick, before we go any further, let's talk about the word archaic and what it means, right? So do me a favor and really just go ahead and write archaic right underneath this word archaic, right? Archaic means of original use or of out-of-date use, right? So it means old. It means very old, very borderline ancient or the original way, right? So Archaic Greece is the foundation of the Greece that you know of when you think of things like mythology or architecture or language or Athens and Sparta or Percy Jackson. You know what I mean? When you're thinking of these things that kind of stick out in your mind as no question Greek culture, it usually emanates from the Archaic Greek period, right? And as we know, the geography of Greece is going to shape these now new baby city-states, right? Because the Minoans and the Mycenaeans were the 2 original people that are were kind of born out of Greece, right? And the Mycenaean people following the Dark Ages are going to have these thoughts and ideas spread by this guy named Hesiod. But during the Dark Ages, 2 particular, very famous, powerful city-states are going to attempt to refound themselves, right? So the Dark Ages was chaos and discontent and kind of just wandering all over the place, right? Trying to refigure out civilization after the fall of the Mycenaeans, right? So the geography, though, of Greece is going to affect the growth of those city-states, right? Because remember, Greece is a part of that Balkan Peninsula, okay? The Balkans, the area, of course, that we're talking about in your geography quiz, which is about a few class periods away, right? So now the big thing about it, though, I will give you prior warning, but you need to start practicing your geography section now. Now, Greece is a part of, though, that Balkan Peninsula, right? Now, speaking of the Balkan Peninsula down in southern Europe, right, we do know that geographic isolationism is going to lead to the establishment of new and unique city-states, right? Now, the 2 most famous ones being this, where'd he go? Well, they're actually located right about down here, and then the other one's located right about up here, all right? Now, but anyway, as you can see, the mountains cover the entire area. We already know that. This is important, though. So, this next phase of this flip, we're going to be talking about things that are kind of uniquely archaic Greek, right? And maybe things that are in common between some of these newer city-states, right? But geographic isolation is going to lead to these new unique city-states. But also, as we already know, when we talked about the Minoans, the archaic Greeks are also going to provide or depend on the sea. And why is that? Good job, Madison. That's exactly right. It's because they only had 20% farmable land. And if you only have 20% farmable land, you're going to depend on the sea as a link for trade, right? And so city-states are going to kind of come into contact with each other later on after their founding, right? Now, really quick, though, what do we think the archaic Greeks might have traded? What are the things that they're going to be trading with other people? Well, here are some of the things that they actually traded. They traded olive oil, wine, eels, cheese, and honey, right? So, and fine pottery. So, like, these are the things that you can produce in Greece. Notice only 2 of these things are actually even considered things that you can grow, right? Olive oil coming from olives, which is one of the only domesticated crops that like naturally exists in Greece, and then wine coming from grapes, which actually is one of the only natural domesticatable crops that comes from Greece, right? So early archaic Greeks would trade the 2 things they knew how to grow, right? But eels was a big one as well, freshwater eels that people can eat, and they're actually very delicious. I've had one before myself. They're very good on sushi. And then also cheese, usually goat cheese, right? Because that's actually the kind of small domesticate they had. They didn't actually have cows or pig or chickens early on. They actually only really knew how to domesticate goat or sheep, and so they would make goat milk cheese, right? Honey is a big thing as well. The early Greeks, the early archaic Greeks, did begin to learn from the Egyptians and others they had traded with in the past how to domesticate bees and harvest their honey, right? And then, of course, another one is fine pottery, right? Usually made out of terracotta clay, right? So now, really quick, there, of course, is olive oil. There is the wine, and right? And, of course, you're going to start seeing a cultural leaping in archaic Greece, right? You're going to start seeing that kind of cultural foundation of archaic Greeks. Okay, so when we get into it, we're going to end up talking about 2 particularly very powerful city-states, that of Athens and Sparta. But Athenians and Sparta are a part of this Greek period known as the Iron Age, also known in Greece, though, Greek history as the Quine era, right, or the Common Era. So, going forward, though, the Greeks also are going to begin to do things that the Minoans and the Mycenaeans didn't even do, right? The new archaic Greeks are going to begin to do things like coin their own money, which is an idea that they're going to adopt after trading with some of the Persians. Excuse me. Oh, God, that was gross. All right, so they're going to adopt this idea after trading with some of the Persians, right? So, coining money, very, very important. The Greeks are also going to develop their very own alphabet, based off which alphabet? Oh, the Phoenician alphabet, right? The Phoenician alphabet, of course, is what type of alphabet? A sound-based alphabet. Very good job, Bailey. All right, very impressive, right? That is the phonetic alphabet, okay? So they're going to trade with the Phoenicians, and then they're going to adopt their alphabet and then integrate that alphabet into their language, right? So yes, the Mycenaeans had a writing system, and we believe that that's the basis of common Greek language. However, these Greeks are going to be the people that actually begin to create their own alphabet, right? The Dorians, of course, after the fallout. Now, the archaic Greeks are also going to show a huge leap forward in things like athletic events, right? They had the Pan-Athletic Games, Pantheon Games. Also, though, a lot of you refer to them simply in the modern era. That's kind of like the Olympics, right? So the Olympics is an original archaic Greek tradition, right? An establishment of a large base game where city-states could compete against each other, right? The prize for winning, of course, was nothing but an olive wreath that you would wear on your head, and immortality, or basically pride in your community for always winning an event, right? And so the big events that were actually existing in the archaic Greek structure were things like discus, javelin, a lot of track and field events. The very first one is a race, right? Like racing, actually a foot race. Hurdle jumping, wrestling is one of the most popular sports as well. Boxing as well was a very, very popular one. Usually, actually, the boxers actually originally fought each other with no wrapping or anything. It was bare knuckle, right? So, but yeah, so the Olympic games would actually cause like a gathering of these city-states, these outside city-states that would actually bring them together and create another, like a fluid culture throughout archaic Greece, right? Now, of course, again, this has a lot to do with their, like, fluidity throughout their entire culture, right? You're also going to see Greek art kind of take on its own development. You're going to see sculpture, and then you're also going to see the adoption of black and red figure pottery, right? So sculpture is going to be very, very important because Greek art begins to try and take on the concept of movement, right? So if you ever see like Egyptian art, 9 times out of 10, they're standing straight up like this and their feet are together. Well, archaic Greeks are going to take sculpture a step further, and that one foot in front of the other is beginning to apply movement or imply movement, right? Which is a big leap forward in the sculpture artistic styles in Western artistic history, right? And then, of course, this right here, that is red figure pottery, right? Red figure pottery actually coming later than black figure pottery. Now, so this right here is actually showing you how they would document also on some of their pottery myths, other famous scenes or historical events, right? So black and red figure pottery, the one I just showed you was red figure, the one before that, or the one that I could show you in class is black figure pottery, right? It's basically just the human characters and what color they are, right? And now, another commonality for all archaic Greeks, even though their cultures were wildly different, is you're going to see the governing style of the city-states is going to change, right? And a lot of that has to do with the construction of each city-state in a common way. Now, each city-state in ancient Greece is going to be referred to as a polis, right? P-O-L-I-S, which actually in the modern English language derived from Greek literally stands for the word city or complex, right? So give me 1 second. Anyway, so the word polis, all right, actually referring originally to archaic Greek city-states, each individual area, is going to be adopted in modern language to mean like large base complex and or city, right? For example, you've heard that word used in things like necropolis, which actually means a very large tomb, or metropolis, as in a very large metropolitan city where Superman lives, right? So like anyway, now the archaic Greek polis consisted of 2 parts, right? Now, what I want you to go ahead and jot down is, first of all, the Acropolis, right? The Acropolis is also known as the high city, right? The high city exists on a hill or a very highly elevated plain, and what is up there is it contains huge marble temples dedicated to each city-state's patron god or goddess, right? So, for example, every single city-state would actually choose a god that would personify their city-state, right? For example, Athens is named after the female goddess of war and peace, Athena. And then also Sparta's patron god was Ares, the god of war just outright in general. And then also Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, right? So that is a very important thing to understand. And the most famous building that is actually built upon an Acropolis is the one that is in image right here, the Parthenon, all right? This right here, which is a very, very famous Greek building, the Parthenon. The Parthenon is actually located on the top of the Acropolis of Athens. Some of y'all have actually probably seen this structure or this building before. It is the same structure that the Lincoln Memorial and the White House are designed based off of. Also, you can see the original use of those we talked about in class, Doric-style columns, right, that exist on the outside of it as well. But that's the Parthenon, right? And the Parthenon exists on that Acropolis of Athens. Acro, of course, meaning high, right? So it's elevated, okay? And then below that, you have the walled main city, right? So the wall actually exists to protect from outsiders and invaders, and the main city is usually on flatter ground and is home to very important buildings and municipal buildings that they needed in these Greek city-states, right? The marketplace is a very important one, known as the agora, right? Highlight that, underline it, make it look like it's exploding. The agora is very important, all right? Because the agora was the location where all Greeks would go to communicate, trade, sell their wares. It's the hinge of their economy and their culture, right? But it also contained other important things like theater, public buildings, and homes for the super wealthy, all right? So within that walled main city, okay? So just to give you some perspective, these are the ruins of ancient Athens. You can see the Acropolis up here with that Parthenon building right there up top. Parthenon, P-A-R-T-H-E-N-O-N, P-A-R-T-H-E-N-O-N. That is going to be one of the fill-in-blank questions on your test. You need to make sure you have that written down as well, which is located on the Acropolis of Athens. And then you have the walled main city beneath it, right? So this is the main city down below. So this, of course, is the view from some of the elevated areas of the Acropolis, and these are, unfortunately, some of the only ruins you actually can go and interact with. So if you ever get a chance, you should definitely go to Athens to see some of these ruins. It's definitely high on my list. But this is what we believe Athens probably looked like when it was at its height, right? So when it was actually fully constructed. So you can see the lower walled main city and then the Acropolis right up here, the Acropolis, where all the temples to their gods and goddesses were located, right? So that is a commonality as well. Even Sparta had this area. Speaking again of the Agora, right? Why it's so important as being the hub of Greek culture, it was the home of the marketplace, right? It's an important gathering place. People would actually go there every single day to meet up, debate, talk, trade, and they also were home to the big festivals for every single city-state where all gods and goddesses would be praised, and there would be animal sacrifices and dancing rituals and different elements like that. It's actually the only time that women were allowed in the Agora. Super sexist. That's really important for you to know, actually. Ancient Greeks did not have the biggest keen idea on women's rights. Women were actually not allowed to go in the Agora without a male escort or unless it was a religious ceremony, right? Which we'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. Now, to keep going forward, though, the marketplace is really, really important. The way you need to think about the agora is kind of like a mall, right? Kind of like Lakeside Mall, right? Every single little, like these little inlets right here is actually a store or a front where you could go up and buy certain goods from certain traders or craftsmen, right? It's actually a fun fact, too. The word agora actually exists in the modern-day English language as well. When we say someone is agoraphobic, that means that they are afraid to go outside their home, and since the only place you were heading in ancient Greece, if you were leaving your home, if it was not to work, you were heading to the agora to sell your wares. That was the biggest public place, right? So agoraphobia is fear of being in public. You're welcome. Now, anyway, so the agora, very, very, very important. Now, also a commonality amongst their religion, right? So again, why are we here? What are we talking about? We are talking right now about archaic Greeks and kind of the elements of Greek culture they all share before we talk about how they're super different, right? So because eventually in class, and when I say eventually, in the next class period, we are going to talk about Sparta and Athens, right? And we are going to take 2 seconds to see how much y'all know about those places already, if anything at all. We'll see, okay? So the religion is the other big commonality because all archaic Greeks were polytheistic, all right? They were a polytheistic group, and they believed that all gods lived on a mythical mountain. Oh, wait, it's actually real, all right? So like the Mount Olympus itself is a very, very large mountain, right? So it's actually located in northern Greece. The real Mount Olympus is located there. Now, do gods live on top of it? No. But did ancient Greeks believe gods lived on top of it? Yes, because it was so tall that it was unscalable by ancient human beings, right? They could not get up there without dying because it actually has snow on top of it all year round, right? It's a very, very elevated like mountain. So they believed, oh, well, the gods live on top of it, and they don't want us up there. That's why we can't get there, right? And so to discover the will of the gods, apparently people would go and talk to very important people in their community, known as oracles, right? Oracles are going to come up a couple of times, and you need to know them mostly for your English class, right? So oracles are priests or priestesses that are supposed to be able to speak with the gods. The Oracle of Delphi is a very, very famous oracle that apparently talked to the father of Alexander the Great, to Alexander the Great himself, and apparently this is one of the wisest people that ever existed. So the oracles were a very, very big part of the archaic Greek community, right? Now, here's the other really important thing. The biggest thing you know about ancient Greeks is, of course, their use of mythology, right? Now, why do they create these stories? Why do they exist? I think Rachel was in class the other day. We were talking about like the trials of Hercules, like briefly, and Rachel was like, wait a second, so why do these stories exist? And it was a phenomenal question. And the other day in class, somebody actually responded with, I think it might have been Sophia, that actually said, oh, well, Greeks didn't have scientific study, so they would create stories about their gods to explain simple scientific things of the natural world that they didn't understand. Like, for example, why does the sun rise? Oh, it's because that one god, Apollo, drags the sun across the sky in a chariot, right? That makes sense. So, oh, why does it thunder and lightning? Oh, it's because Zeus, the god of thunder and lightning, actually like wields thunderbolts, and he is like all about it, and blah, 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 blah. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, right? That's why all the mythological gods have like a thing that they are a god of, right? So it actually helps them explain natural events of the world that they might not understand. And that right there is the actual real Mount Olympus. And some of you are probably immediately saying, I don't see no gods up there. Well, yeah, they're stories, you know what I mean? And these are ancient people that had no ability to climb to the top of that mountain. So, of course, they're going to create these different like ideas. Now, another very common thing across all archaic Greek people was their methods of warfare, all right? So they would fight wars very, very similar, right? This right here, that is their actual like Greek soldiers that are going to use iron weapons. Do I have what they're called around here anywhere? Hold up, hold up, hold up, hold up, hold up, hold up. Nope, nope. Oh, weird. Okay, so anyway, no, wait, I do, don't I? No, wait, there it is. All right, so every Greek soldier, there he is known as one of these, right? So a hoplite, all right? So every Greek soldier, when it comes to their warfare methods, was known as a hoplite, all right? So every single soldier itself right here, that word hoplite means shield, all right? The word shield, okay? And you'll see why it's super important for every single soldier to be called a hoplite here in a second, because the shield was believed to be the most important piece of equipment that a Greek soldier would ever actually use, right? Speaking of shields and weaponry, they used iron weapons, right? Because remember, with the Mycenaeans, the Bronze Age collapsed, and then the Iron Age came out of it, right? Following the Dark Ages, Greeks began to use iron weapons, shields, and armor, right? So, and they would usually use plate armor with iron plates actually laid on top of leather and things like that. There's big 3 famous weapons, and the ones that every single Greek soldier would carry with them. They would usually carry a shield, all right, again, a hoplite, right, because they're each known by their shield. They would carry a long spear, and then they would have a iron short sword, right, a Greek short sword. So the big thing about it, nope, stop, go back, is, what are you doing to me? And there they are, right? Because remember, the Bronze Age ended with the Mycenaeans. The Iron Age began in the Dark Ages and was perfected by those archaic Greeks, right? That's why they carried iron weapons with them, okay? So I'm going to keep going, though, okay, because I don't want to, take up too much of your time, okay? Just hit pause on that real quick just so you can remember that kind of periodization of the Greek time structure. Now, this is why every single Greek soldier was known as a hoplite, right? So, mainly due to this thing called the Phalanx system, right? This original, very, very amazing Phalanx, war structure idea was perfected by the ancient Greeks, and it's what they used to take out people like the Persians, which we'll talk about later, right? To take out people like their own people, right? Because Philip II, father of Alexander the Great, which we'll talk about later, and towards the Hellenistic period, is going to be a master at using the phalanx as well as other military tactics. But the phalanx is what the archaic Greeks would use to fight these wars, right? So this is why they're all referred to as a hoplite, right? Every single Greek soldier is called a hoplite, which means their shield, due to the fact that it was the most important piece of their equipment. Because to create the phalanx structure, everybody needed one, right? The way it looks like is almost like in class, right? You know how my rows go back, right? My rows go back. So every single one of you would have a shield and a spear. And the enemy would be me, right? Up here at the front of class, right? It would be me, Mr. Wooderson, Mr. Mathern, Mr. Broussard, Mr. Thompson, right? All the male teachers here, Mr. Cotton, right? So we'd be all standing here, we'd be ready to attack you, right? Well, every one of you would have your shield up in front of you, and you would actually have a sword, or not a sword, you would actually have your spear coming over the edge of your shield, right? And so basically, you're this giant, armored, immovable object because you're all linked up and together, right? So if we all rushed at you to try and attack you as fast as we could, you would just bump us off with your shields and then reach over and stab us on the other side of this big shield wall, right? Now, of course, the great thing about the phalanx system is, let's say hypothetically who's somebody that sits up front. Bella sits up front, right? Bella sits up front, Bella Carbo. And let's say hypothetically I squeaked my sword through and I stabbed Bella, right? And Bella hits the ground. The great thing about the phalanx system is the person who sits behind her, which I believe is Haven, can now just step up and fill Bella's spot, and the phalanx has not broken, right? So the phalanx system is this really, really intense, very, very awesome thing, right? And then last but not least, you got to understand one thing about archaic Greeks that is a culturally ubiquitous thing, something they all did, right? Archaic Greeks were very keen on this aspect of colonization. Right? Now, this is probably the most important part of this flip, all right? Because it's the thing that most people forget really quickly. What does it mean to colonize something? It means to send representatives of your community to go and create a small outpost or outcrop for your community, right? So basically think about it. Remember, the Americas were colonized by the French, the Europeans. Like, for example, New Orleans was originally a French colony, right? It is a city outcrop in a territorial area owned by a foreign government used for their benefit, right? So basically, the Greek city-states, towards the end of the Archaic period, they grew very rapidly, and as their power grew, they began to actually colonize other areas to find different goods to bring back to their communities. Again, because remember, they're not that farmable. They can't really grow a ton of stuff due to that very, very poor farmland. And also, it created a very strong and powerful civilization, right? So, big and very, very important thing is that Greeks colonized a lot of stuff. So, towards the end of the Archaic period, getting into the Classical period, all these areas around here were actually colonized by the ancient Greeks, right? And it's why their culture actually spread so quickly. Remember, cultural diffusion. It's very, very important. Now, that is right there the last thing we're going to really talk about this flip. And tomorrow, we're going to start talking about Athens and Sparta. And here's what I want you to do, okay? You have one extra little piece of homework, okay, that goes along with this, okay? What I want you to do is I need you to find 2 interesting facts about Athens and just 2 interesting facts about Sparta, okay, before you come into class. So the end of this flip, when I check it in class to make sure you didn't mute it and to make sure you did what you're supposed to, I literally want you to be like, Athens, interesting fact, bing, bing. Sparta, interesting fact, bing, bing. And it can be anything. It can be about their mythology. It can be about tradition. It can be about their culture. It can be about anything. But I want you to just kind of dip your toes into it a little bit before you come into class, okay? So I'll talk to you guys then. Y'all have a good one.